It's now day 2. Uriel and Rhiannon will wake up in their king-sized Victorian bed. The first thing they will see is the sun rising outside their windowed wall and balcony. The sun will be rising over the Salish Sea and Cloverleaf Point. To wake up and start the day fresh and new, they will take a shower in their massive bathroom. All the guests of Dashwood Manor, Bed and Breakfast Inn, then meet in the grand dining room with a fireplace and views of the ocean. It is now time for breakfast from 8:30 am to 9:30 am. They have a 4-star gourmet chef and 2 nice ladies serving everyone. They pay close attention to food allergies and preferences before anyone checks in. They ask every evening if you're going to be there for breakfast the next day, or heading out early. There is fruit, coffee, juice, pancakes, eggs, French toast, sausages, pastries, and all sorts of goodies to start your day, as you can see pictured here. Not only is the food very good, but the chef makes it all look like a piece of art before it is served to each guest. It's now time to start their second day. They have to go across the street and cut through Beacon Hill Park. Yes, they explored it yesterday, but today they are just taking a quick shortcut through part of it. It's the fastest way to get to today's destinations. So they will be walking through part of it once more, but not making any stops. They will have to walk through Lover's Lane once more, but just keep on going. They will walk past yesterday's petting zoo, and yesterday's rose garden, but they will just keep on going. They will walk past many cherry blossom trees, in full bloom, and they are so beautiful, this time of year, at the end of April. They will walk by a very historical tree. It is the largest tree in all of the Beacon Hill Park. In the bottom left, you see 2 adults standing under a tree branch. That shows you just how massive this tree really is. This tree was planted in 1913. It is a giant sequoia, Sequoiadendron giganteum. These trees live long lives, get very wide, and reach for the sky and heavens above. They will pass by many beautiful trees of many various kinds. The colors are intense, and sometimes even overwhelming. They will walk past the original location of the famous Chinese bell. It's not there anymore, but there is now a memorial stone about it. Back in the day, as you can see in this photo, it was a large bell surrounded by cannons. Lastly, they walk past the large watering can, water spray park, they saw yesterday, and are now about to leave the park. They now leave Beacon Hill Park. Everything they will see now is new to them. They are now crossing the street into one of the oldest neighborhoods in Victoria. That would be the James Bay area. The James Bay neighborhood goes back to the 1840s and is Victoria's oldest residential district. Some of the houses of that era are still seen and around even today. So Uriel and Rhiannon will feel like they took a step back in history. They finally made it to their first destination. It is called Fisherman's Wharf. A working fishing dock since just after World War II, but there is also many other things to see. This unique marine destination offers food and ice cream kiosks, unique shops, and eco-tour adventures in the heart of the working harbor. Wander down the docks with your lunch, buy seafood fresh off the boat, see moored pleasure vessels, and floating homes and houseboats, and watch as working fishing vessels unload their catches of the day. There are houseboats, and some are multi-floored, and very fancy. There are restaurants serving seafood that was just caught that morning, there are bars, gift shops, whale watching tours. All of this is floating on the water, and many of these people live here all year round. Especially the fishermen. At the wharf, they will see sea lions. Rhiannon and Uriel like to think of them as sea kittens and jokingly call them that. Sea cats. If the weather is nice, and it's a warm day, maybe they will get an ice cream cone at Jackson's ice cream shop. This floating village at Fisherman's Wharf even has waterboat taxis to take you around the harbor. How cool is that? It's now time to move on towards our next destinations. As Uriel and Rhiannon walk towards downtown, all the streets in April are lined with beautiful, blossoming, cherry trees. They will walk past the old historic Pendray Inn and Tea House. A very old historic building, on the way to downtown Victoria. They will then walk past the Black Ball Ferry Terminal, with the Coho Ferry to Washington. For those people going, it is only a 2.5-hour trip from Victoria to Washington. Uriel and Rhiannon have somewhere downtown to be next, so they will keep on walking. The next thing they will see is the Confederation Fountain, and the waterfall wall behind it. On each side is the official crest of all the provinces of Canada. They will see a street with horses and carriages on both sides. They will have to ignore that for now, and come back to that later on, in the evening. For now, they have somewhere else to be. They must keep going. They will then walk past the Victoria Legislature grounds. They have finally arrived at today's main event. It is the Victoria's Royal BC Museum. A very large museum famous for its realism of its exhibits. Some are so realistic in fact, that you can forget where you are, and get fully immersed in the section of the museum that you are walking through. Everything can look so real, it almost feels like you are really there. They will start on the first level, and there is multiple levels here. There is so much to see on the tour of this museum. They would normally start with Totem Pole Hall, but under new laws worldwide, these areas are closed permanently. Not just here in Victoria, BC, Canada, but every museum, everywhere on Earth. Now all these totem poles that were stolen in the 1700s and 1800s have to be all returned to the indigenous peoples. It gets even more interesting. The National Museum of History in New York is mostly closed and has to return hundreds of thousands of ancient First Peoples bodies and remains back to the indigenous people for proper burials. Also in Australia. If you look around the world today, many museums are closing their doors due to the racism and cruelty and the theft of indigenous peoples' relics, artifacts, and culture. These things are sacred to them, and over years from now, are all slowly being returned to where they truly belong. So no, Rhiannon and Uriel won't be seeing this today, or ever. History needs to be told properly. Forgiveness needs to be gained. And reconciliation is the beginning. In today's world we are working towards a world with less racism, and more peace, and trying to make a world where all have rights and are treated as equals. So as far as the museum goes in Victoria, BC where they are going today, 14 out of 24 exhibits are permanently closed. There is now only 58% of the museum to see. Because of this, the museum has lowered its admission fees, to make it fair to the public. In the past you could see the First Peoples exhibit. It is now permanently closed. All indigenous peoples' artifacts and relics are being returned to the tribes in which they were stolen by explorers long ago. You used to be able to see how Victoria and British Columbia became a province in the 1770s. But that is now permanently closed for good. History needs to be rewritten about the truths of how the explorers came to the Americas, and forced the indigenous peoples with no choice into their religions of Catholicism and residential schools. They used racism against the First Peoples and took everything from them. So now museums are closing and eventually will rebuild with the truth. In the past the museum story was one-sided. In the future, both sides of the story will be told. You used to see the history of the Maritimes, their military, and their ships. This area is now permanently closed. These military people were responsible for murder of millions of indigenous peoples long ago, and some tribes were even completely wiped out. There are pieces of history that need to be changed to tell the true story, and how in reality it was an act of terrorism. The way museums were, up to now, was an insult to First Peoples, and glorified these soldiers that were responsible for the deaths and tortures of so many. You used to be able to learn about discovery ships. This area is now permanently closed. The history is a lie and only told from the British point of view. We now know that they were not the first to discover Canada and the Americas. There were many others before them, such as the Vikings and others such as indigenous peoples. History needs to be updated and changed. Museums need to be done with full accuracy, and tell the truth about what really happened. You used to see things about the fur trade, but that is now permanently closed. The fur trade was a time when cheap non-expensive things were given to the First Peoples, in exchange for furs and garments that in those days were worth a very large amount of money and greed. The travelers of that time abused and took very much advantage of the indigenous peoples at that time. The stories are being corrected, taking away the glorifications of what the explorers did, and telling more about the impact it had on the culture of the indigenous people who were there, and how it changed their sacred ways of life. You used to see the gold rush era, but that is now permanently closed now too. You used to be able to walk through replicas of coal mines, but those are now permanently closed too. You used to learn about Canada's logging industry history. That portion of the museum is permanently closed now also. You used to see exhibits teaching us about the early settlers and their farming. What they don't tell you in these historical pictures and stories, is what they did to the indigenous families of the time to get the land to build those farms on. So all these areas listed previous to this, are now permanently closed at the museum, and none of the public will ever see them ever again. This equals 42% of the museum in Victoria now being closed off to everyone as they make the changes. Is it even worth going there anymore, you might wonder? Is it worth Rhiannon and Uriel even going there to see the remaining 58% that is still there? Well, first of all, to be fair, the museum cut the cost of admission by a lot. The rest of the museum is still fully intact and open to the public in its entirety. So let's now talk about what they will see on their trip to the Royal British Columbia Museum of Victoria. So now let's focus on the positive. Here is what Rhiannon and Uriel will see at the museum this day. There is a replica of Port Moody long ago. It has the main street with stores, hotels, and everything. You can even go into most of them, and look around. How cool is that? Next they will see a replica, of the Majestic Theatre, of 1909. This theatre, was one of the first places, to play silent movies by Charlie Chaplin. Next they will go and see a replica of a street in Old Chinatown, and what it looked like in the early 1900s. They will get to see kitchens from long ago, over 100 years, and how people lived before modern technology. They will then walk a ways and see bedrooms from the early 1900s, and how people lived and slept back then. They will see various workspaces, and offices, from long ago. They will walk through the corridor of natural history, and see all the technological advances over the past 100 years. Things like old radios, old computers, old televisions, old telephones, etc. They will then go downstairs to a different floor. On the left-hand side of this floor is an area for feature exhibits. These rooms on the left, have items that change every couple of months, and always have a special theme to them. The exhibit on display, when Uriel and Rhiannon go to the Royal BC Museum in Victoria, will be wildlife photography, at that time. This will be an exhibit, of the real deal photos, not prints, of over 100 top photographers, around the world. Some even work for National Geographic. All the real wildlife photos on display, are borrowed from another museum in the United Kingdom, and will be returned after the exhibit. They now go over to the right side of the map, and continue on with the tour of the museum. They now walk into the Cretaceous corridor, and learn about the Cretaceous period, so long ago. They will then go into the Ice Age corridor, where they will see a life-sized woolly mammoth, amongst other things from that time period. The next corridor they will enter, is the Canadian forest, and forest animals. Here there are displays of all Canadian forest animals, as well as a very realistic habitat, for all tourists of the museum to see. The next area will be about oceanic animals, and their lives upon both the water, and the land near it. Now they will enter into the wetlands. A place to learn about lakes, the plants that grow in them, the wildlife that lives in them, and how they are so important for keeping the Earth's environment safe. In the final and last section of the museum, they will see aquariums with real, living, oceanic creatures. There will also be pictures of larger creatures and information about them as well. They will then go outside, but still on the museum's grounds. There are outside displays as well for free to the public. This is called Thunderbird Park. The first thing they will see is the Mungo Martin Longhouse, where indigenous people show their traditional ceremonies and dances to the public around a real fire. There will be lots of different hand-carved totem poles to see. Next, they will see the Dr. John Sebastian Helmkin House. He was a doctor, and a surgeon, when the explorers came, and tried to colonize the indigenous First Peoples. Then they will see the Sisters of St. Anne's original residential school. It was the very first residential school in Western Canada, and this is the original building. The actual place where Catholic nuns were converting natives from their own sacred ways, and forcing them to the British ways of Catholicism. They will then see a demonstration of totem carving. The indigenous peoples carve and explain to the public how they go about building totem poles, and the deep spiritual meaning behind the animals and ancestors they carve into them. It's now time to leave the museum and move on. They will cross the street and see a statue of Emily Carr. She was a very famous artist years ago. They will then cross the street again, and explore Victoria's downtown inner harbour. In April when they are going, there is so much beauty of flower gardens everywhere. There are little markets and vendors everywhere along the sea wall. There are boats and ships coming and going all day. Walking across the street again in the middle of the harbour, they will then walk in front of the world-famous Fairmont Empress Hotel. It was built on January 20, 1908. It's often seen in the spring covered in green moss and ivy. It is truly an amazing centerpiece in the downtown Victoria Harbour. Along the left side of the hotel is an entrance to a place called Miniature World. This is a place of recreations of real-life events from the past, all built in miniature. What's even more exciting about these displays is this one pictured for example. Not only is it miniature in a window behind glass for all of us to see, but all the rides move and function just like the large real-sized ones would. Spinning, twirling, up and down, and all around. Even some of the cars and people move about. There is a miniature of a town parade, and the floats and cars literally go up and down the streets, while people are waving from the sidelines. There is a miniature recreation of a mountainous view. There are castles, a gondola that literally goes up and down the mountain, and trains that go around picking up and dropping off passengers. These three displays are only a small part of Miniature World. There will be so much more for Rhiannon and Uriel to see when they go there in real life. Okay. Now it's time to go for a walk through the beautiful, historic downtown. Rhiannon loves books, and is quite the bookworm. Uriel has a very exciting surprise for her. He's taking her to one of the top 10 National Geographic bookstore wonders in the world. The Monroe's Bookstore. It is still, in all its beauty and splendor, since 1963. Much of the place is in its original form. They will walk past Irish Times pub. This building is very, very old. A picture is one thing, but seeing it in person is another. It's amazing. Next on the list is Chinatown, and the world-famous Fantan Alley. This alley is so narrow, you can put your back against one wall, and your feet on the other, and shimmy up the wall if you wanted to. After walking through this very narrow alley from either end of the city block, it opens up a bit in the middle. Long, long ago, these places used to be brothels and opium dens, but today it is high-end fashion stores, retro vinyl record sales, fancy perfume shops, and souvenir shops. It is one of the most haunted areas in the world also, because of its past. It is definitely an interesting place to see. All the addresses are a door number and a half, because it's such a narrow alley. This alley is so famous, it was even used for quite a few movie scenes. They will then cut through on an angle, through Centennial Square, and City Hall. In this square, there is a large fountain, and whale statues, all over the place, as if the whales were swimming, and coming out of the concrete. If there is enough time, they will go into Victoria City's downtown Bay Center Mall. If they have time they will pick up some snacks and a drink at the food court, before moving on to the rest of this day's journey. Next on the list is Christ's Church Gothic Cathedral, which started being built back in 1896, but wasn't fully completed to the way you see it today, until the 1950s. It went through wars and other things in history that slowed down its construction. This is one of the largest churches in Canada with towers reaching as high as 122 feet. It has arched ceilings, it has stone hallways, it has man-made stained glass, it has a large built-in pipe organ, it has many marble pillars, and so much historical beauty. Rhiannon and Uriel may not be religious, but they want to see this place for its architecture. It is one amazing building. On their way back towards the waterfront, they will pass by a very old historical site. The Church of Lord of National History. This is another Gothic-style church, but instead of being made of stone, this one is made by master carpenters. The craftsmanship is absolutely remarkable. Now Uriel and Rhiannon, go back to the horses they saw earlier, by the Parliament buildings. Only this time, something is different. Surprise Rhiannon! This horse, and carriage, is your 45-minute, limousine ride home. No joke. So let's go say hello. So Rhiannon, the first thing they will do is introduce you to your horse. They are very gentle and sweet. Of course they sometimes might have a bad day, but most of the time they are loving and affectionate. The handler of the day will still introduce you to your horse either way. Whatever you do when you get overexcited, is try not to squeal and geek out. So Rhiannon, your chariot awaits. Let's get you all cozy in a faux fur blanket, all tucked in and ready for your horse-drawn carriage ride home. But this is not just a ride home, it's also another adventure. As your driver has all the knowledge of Victoria's history, places to show you, and stories to tell you, on your way home. So let's sit back, relax from the day, and see what wonderful things we can learn. The company is called Tally-Ho. Tally-Ho has been around doing carriage rides in Victoria, since May 9, 1903. So it is safe to say that they have had over 121 years of experience. They are one of the first companies to do this kind of work in and around the capital city. It is why Uriel chose them over the competition. They may have lower prices, but they don't have the experience that this prestige company has. They give very informative tours of the area, and know their history of each and every place they show you. Horses work 2 shifts a day, morning and afternoon. If there is a heatwave in summer, they might have 3 shifts for the day. At each shift change, the horses are sent home to run free on a farm, and fresh well-rested horses are brought in. During hot days, the horses are cooled down with a water system between clients at the station where they are parked. They are also given water-infused food to keep them hydrated. Tally-ho takes much better care of their horses than many of their competitors do. This tour will take them, mostly through the James Bay area. It is Victoria's oldest neighborhood. It dates back to the early settlers. The idea that Tally-ho has, is to treat each and every one of their guests as if they themselves were royalty. To give tourists a taste for a few minutes, of how the other half lives. Spoiled, and treated, with the utmost dignity and respect. Just like a king or queen would be treated if they were the ones on a tour. The horses are from a farm, called Hidden Acres, which is only about 25 minutes out, from downtown Victoria. This company doesn't treat their horses like they are objects making money. They treat their horses as if they themselves are a part of their immediate family. Tally-ho has a very strict dress code and etiquette for all their drivers and staff. They must present themselves in the utmost professionalism at all times. Tally-ho uses Clydesdales, Perche-Rons, Belgians, and Shire horses for their carriages. They are magnificent, beautiful animals. When not working, their horses get to roam 100% free on the farm, without a care in the world. They are happy, and well cared for. With the money Tally-ho makes from tours, these horses are well pampered, and have everything a horse could ever need and want. They live a life better than most other farms can ever offer. Okay Rhiannon. I know you love horses, but it's time to say good night, to your horse, and to your driver. The company was sweet enough, to not only work out a personalized tour just for us, but they even were willing to drop us off literally right at our bed and breakfast door. It's time to get some much needed rest. Why you might ask? Because you still have 3 more days to this amazing adventure. Tomorrow I've got something for you right out of a fairy tale. You're going to a real-life castle. Yes. Yes you are. So get some rest, Sleeping Beauty, because tomorrow is another exciting day.